Before the Pilgrims ever set foot on American soil, a different story had already unfolded. A story that reshaped an entire continent, silently and almost invisibly. From 1616 to 1620, a mysterious plague swept across New England's native nations. A sickness so devastating that whole villages died within weeks. Fields lay untouched. Canoes were left drifting. Fires burned out on their own. To the Pilgrims arriving in 1620, the land appeared empty, open, waiting. But it wasn't waiting. It was mourning. Governor William Bradford would later write of this strange, great sickness that had swept away many thousands. Historians today call it one of the greatest demographic collapses in human history. Yet this tragedy, the Great Dying, rarely appears in schoolbooks or Thanksgiving stories. A civilization had already fallen long before the Pilgrims prayed on Plymouth Rock. Tonight, we uncover the forgotten apocalypse of 1616-1620, the tragedy the Pilgrims never saw, and the lost world that vanished in silence. In the early months of 1616, the people of New England felt a strange unease. There were no omens in the sky, no enemy warriors on the horizon, yet something was wrong. It began quietly, almost invisibly. A fever here, a shiver there, an unexpected cough echoing through a longhouse at night. But these were strong nations, Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Patuxet, people who had survived winters, storms and wars for generations. Illness was not new to them, but this was different. Villagers fell ill, without wounds, without warnings, without reason. Healers searched the forests for sacred plants they had used for hundreds of years, but nothing worked. Stories spread between villages of a strange sickness moving along the coast, moving faster than any messenger could ride. No one knew where it came from. No one understood why it was spreading, but every day, more fires burned through the night, and every morning, fewer voices rose to greet the sun. By the end of 1616, the sickness no longer whispered, it roared. What began as scattered fevers spread with unnatural speed along the coast. Whole families fell ill within hours. Villages that had stood for generations found themselves powerless against an invisible enemy. The people of New England had faced hardship before. Harsh winters, rival tribes, starvation, but nothing like this. There were no wounds to treat, no spirits to appease, no cures to prepare. The sickness struck the strong first, then the elders, then the children. Healers traveled from village to village, but soon even they were collapsing before finishing their rituals. By 1617, smoke from funeral fires drifted across the shoreline day and night. Trade paths fell silent. Canoes returned empty. In some villages, there were not enough living people left to bury the dead, and as the plague raced north and south, it spared no one, not the Wampanoag, not the Massachusetts, not the Patuxet. The coastline of New England, one of the most populated indigenous regions in North America, was becoming a graveyard. By 1618, New England's coastline, once home to tens of thousands, had become a quiet world of echoes. Smoke rose where funeral fires burned without pause. Fields that once fed nations were overgrown with weeds. Villages that had stood for centuries were now filled with silence. Those who survived described scenes too devastating to comprehend. Longhouses full of the dead, trails marked by abandoned belongings, children wandering without parents. Some villages lost everyone. Others had only a handful left. And as the sickness spread north and south, more and more settlements turned into ghost towns. European fishermen sailing off the coast recorded seeing empty beaches and no canoes, an impossible sight in a land once full of bustling trade and movement. By the time the epidemic peaked, entire nations along the Atlantic coast had been nearly erased. The Wampanoag, the Massachusetts, the Pawtucket, the Pennacook, the Narragansett, all suffered losses so severe that elders believed the world itself was ending. New England, a land alive for thousands of years, had become a graveyard.
Spirits will guide my hand to heal you.
For generations, the people of New England had lived with illness, fevers, winter sickness, wounds from war. But this plague was different. It ignored borders, seasons, medicines, and traditions. It struck the strong before the weak, the hunters before the elders, and entire families in a single night. Eyewitness accounts described victims with burning fevers, violent sweats, and skin that turned strange colors. Some survived for days, others for only hours. Healers spoke of bodies swollen, of sudden weakness, of bleeding, of sores unlike anything they had seen. Centuries later, historian and physician Herbert Upham Williams examined these reports. He compared the symptoms to smallpox, to plague, to yellow fever. But none matched perfectly. Some symptoms were classic. Others were impossible to explain. Whatever this sickness was, it spread with unnatural speed along the coast. Williams concluded it may have come from European fishermen and traders, people who visited long before the Pilgrims arrived. The native nations, with no immunity to Old World diseases, were defenseless. The result was not simply an epidemic, but a biological catastrophe. The mystery remains unsolved, but its impact reshaped the continent itself. In November of 1620, after months at sea, the Pilgrims finally reached the shores of New England. Cold winds whipped across the grey Atlantic, and the Mayflower creaked as it approached an unknown world. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found. According to Governor William Bradford, the Pilgrims walked into an abandoned village, Patuxet, with empty homes still standing, tools lying where they had been left, and fields already cleared for planting. But the people were gone. They found corn stored underground, left unclaimed. Paths that once bustled with life lay silent. Canoes drifted where fishermen had once gathered. Everywhere the Pilgrims went, they saw signs of a civilization struck down in an instant. Bradford wrote that the land had been swept clear by a great sickness. To the Pilgrims, it was divine providence, a land mysteriously prepared for them. But the truth was far darker. The land had been prepared by tragedy. The Pilgrims did not settle an untouched wilderness. They settled the ruins of a fallen nation, shaped by a plague they never saw. When the Pilgrims settled Patuxet in 1620, they believed the land had been prepared for them. But history reveals a darker truth. It had been emptied, not by destiny, but by tragedy. The Great Dying of 1616 to 1620 erased whole nations long before the first Thanksgiving feast. This was not a silent wilderness, as the Pilgrims imagined. It was a land still echoing with the loss of tens of thousands of people. Had the epidemic not struck, the Pilgrims would have met thriving, powerful native nations. Instead, they met survivors mourning their families, their villages, their world. The political balance, the alliances, the very survival of the English colony all were shaped by a catastrophe the Pilgrims never saw. Herbert Upham Williams wrote in 1909 that this epidemic was one of history's forgotten turning points, a biological disaster that rewrote the future of a continent. Today, when we speak of pilgrims and Thanksgiving, we rarely speak of the apocalypse that came before them. But the truth remains, America's origin story did not begin with a feast. It began with a silence, the silence of a world already gone.